Hey, my name is Doug Pagitt, and I want to chat a little bit about what we do with preaching at the church that I'm a part of called Solomon's Porch in South Minneapolis. We're a church that started about 10 years ago, and over the course of those years, we have developed a style that we call a progressional implicatory style of preaching. What it basically is the idea that our whole community would participate in the preaching act. That we think preaching is so important that we want everyone to be part of it. Some of the impetus for me in initiating this way of preaching in our community was I knew that for me as a pastor, that one of the most important developments in my faith was working on a sermon every week. I knew that I thought better and thought more interesting thoughts about my faith and the Bible and the way that we're going to live the story of God in our world because I had to think about it through the lens of preaching. So what I wanted to do was to include our community in that process. So the way we do preaching is intended to take the obligation of the sermon and the significance and importance of the sermon and to put that in the hands of all of our people so that everyone feels like they're part of it. Now, that happens in a couple of ways, right? Part of it happens on the Sunday nights when we're meeting in our community and we're doing our sermons. And we typically take a whole book of the Bible and read through it together as a community. That's the general, more typical structure of a sermon. So we will spend 6 months or 3 months or sometimes a whole year inside of one book of the Bible having discussion about what the Bible is saying, what it means for us, and how we are implicated by that story. So sometimes the progressional dialogue happens on the Sunday nights right as a part of the very reading that we're doing. But then there's also a section of it that happens the Tuesday before. We do an open sermon discussion group that anyone's invited to come to, and we have people who are full parts of our church and people who just like coming to the sermon discussion group who come and help us shape and form the sermon together. So it's out of that group where we choose the topics that we're going to cover, both the series that we're going to be in with the book of the Bible or whatnot, but then also how much of it we cover and how we go about covering that particular topic. So what happens is the sermon becomes this collective experience that part of my role as the organizer and as the pastor in our community is to be sure that my voice is included along with all of these other voices. So one of the skills that I've had to learn is how do I curate, sort of like how an artist or a director of an art gallery would curate a show. How do I curate sermons? How do I curate a series so that it involves all of the voices or as many of the voices as we can find in our community? Well, what that means is there are times where it feels more like improv, right? If you know the rules and the skills of improv or of jazz music. It's more like jazz or improv than it is like preparation and presentation. So there's a lot of dynamism that goes into having to create a sermon within a lived community by that lived community to express it to itself as its calling of what God would have us to be about in the world that we live in. So we tend to think about sermons as this communal act that we all participate in, and part of my role is as the curator of it. So anyway, that's for the nines, that's how we go about thinking about sermons and how we think about sermons being a collective activity of the entire community of Solomon's Porch. And in that way, we're all listeners and we are all preachers. And so we like to take the priesthood of all believers and extend it even to the preaching act. So not only is the throne of God open for someone to approach with confidence, but so is the pulpit around our place. So anyway, I'm Doug Pagitt, and from my backyard, that's my contribution for the nines.